announcements that have been scrolling, and which are a lot of fun. And I do want to highlight the hands-on in the garden later on this month that you may want to attend, and some volunteer opportunities. But I also want to show you this slide, which is a tip of the hat, or a pat on the back, or a recognition really for one of our master gardeners that of whom you may not be aware, and that is AJ Sinchak. He is such an excellent writer. He was a college professor, and so he is used to speaking, and as such, he does take many task on and speaking for local community groups. When someone calls or writes and wants a speaker for a particular topic, oftentimes AJ does that and does an excellent job of that. He also does a lot of writing in the past for us in articles. He also does writing for the Master Naturalist, and he is a member of the Master Naturalist. And so I wanted to give a shout out to AJ. You may not be aware of him. You probably don't see him a lot in some of the places where you are, but he is one of our valued members, as you all are. And we're so glad to see you today. And so it is now 7:02. And so Colleen, let's hear from you. Casey and I are ready to hear from you this evening. We're looking forward to that. You take over.
Thank you so much, Lois. And I just want to commend Lois for her efforts in running the Zoom for us and doing the technical stuff and coordinating. And I just really appreciate that. And I want to also say thank you to the Williamson County Master Gardeners for inviting me back over and over. I'm so pleased to be with y'all again. And so this is going to be part 2 of the class, and a lot of people showed up again, so it must have been pretty good the first time people showed up again. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen now, and to my little presentation is part 2 of practical landscape design. Can y'all see that?
I can see it, yes.
Okay, great. All right, so here we are. Part 2, I have another announcement to make. Here's my information again. I'm very pleased to announce that right here, the Central Texas Seed Savers, we are having our 3rd annual seed swap on October 9th from 12 to 3. That's October 9th from 12 to 3. It's at the Austin Public Library Central Branch, which is downtown. So y'all will have to hike down to be part of the Central Texas Seed Savers 3rd annual seed swap. Of course, last year we had to skip it, so it was semi-annual. So I hope y'all can join us. You bring seeds from your yard. You can bring seeds that you collected. Any kind of seeds. You can bring leftover seeds from commercial seed packets if you have some that you're not going to use. You don't have to bring seeds either. You can just come and check it out. We usually always have plenty of seeds to go around. So, okay, so just real excited to announce that. I was wondering if you all did your homework from the last class. Did you finish your list of objectives for your project, for your property or the yard that you're working on? Okay, or your journal entry or some photos, idea, just thinking about what your wish list is. Did you take some photos of your property? Did you dig up your title survey? Did you look at Google satellite images? Any one of those things to kind of get some paper documentation of your, or electronic documentation of your property and the space that you're getting ready to design. And did you have a chance to measure your existing trees and map out the critical root zone? And last time we ran out of time, so I didn't get to explain what the critical root zone is. So I'm going to do that right now. And if you didn't get to do your homework, that's okay. We're gonna power through. Let me reduce that. Okay, so here we go. When I design, I start with the trees, the existing trees. As my friend, co-host of the Horticulturati podcast, Leah Cherner, says, she designs the landscape from the top down. And really, our established trees in the landscape are the most valuable part of any landscape. They're really the only part of the landscape that add value to your actual like appraisal, property appraisal. They're the only part of the landscape that really gains monetary value over time. They're the only part of our infrastructure that gains value over time, if you think about our cities and society. So it's really important for us to protect them. Here's a resource right here for measuring trees, for how to measure the trees. I'm going to put that in the chat. I'm going to try to put it in the chat for you all to use. Hold on one sec. Sorry, I'm lost. Lois, can you find a way to put that in the chat for me? Okay. And if not, we'll send it out to you guys afterwards too. It's just a really good resource from the city of Portland, Oregon, about how to measure your tree. And here's what the city of Austin uses as the rule for the city of Austin tree ordinance of how trees, what's acceptable for in terms of impacting trees when you're landscaping or building or doing any kind of construction project around a tree. And the critical root zone is the entire radius around the tree. Okay, you can see how much further the roots extend out in this diagram. They extend way out further than just where the branches are. Okay, this is very accurate in the way that trees actually grow. And so if you measure a tree that is 20 inches in diameter, 20-inch diameter tree, that means the entire critical root zone of the tree extends out in a 20-foot radius away from the tree trunk. Okay, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but it's a really good jumping off point when you're thinking about how to preserve and protect the existing trees on a property. And I use this even when I'm designing outside of Austin where there isn't a tree ordinance. I still use this as a guide for protecting and preserving the roots of the trees. Okay, so we don't want to put walkways through the critical root zone here. In half of the critical root zone is right here. You don't want to dig down more than 4 inches or raise up more than 4 inches. Okay, so just keep this in mind. This is a little mind bending, so it's okay if you don't understand it right away. Like I said, it's a jumping off point, kind of a guide for protecting your trees and just keeping their roots in mind when you're designing. So you don't want to come and just pave the entire area right up around a tree. Okay. All right. So measure your trees and get a feel for how big their root system is. All right, then up next, I want to introduce you to the concept of foundation plants. And this is a really important part of the way that I design. That's not true for a lot of designers. I think a lot of designers have a different style. This is really important part of my personal style. And here, foundation plants are plants that are evergreen, relatively slow growing, don't need a ton of care. They're there to make the yard look put together and well designed year round. So I'll point out the foundation plants in these photos. So here's one. This is holly fern. It doesn't have to be a shrub. So most of the time people think like, oh, it's going to be a shrub and it's going to be boring. Or people hear the word foundation plant and they think, oh, that's the plant that you use to cover up the foundation of your house. And that's not true either. It's the foundation of the landscape. So it's there all the time, looking good, keeping the yard looking pulled together. So holly fern is one example. In this landscape has multiple foundation plants. So there's sago palms here. Of course, a lot of you are probably sneering or laughing because a lot of people lost their sagos in the freeze. A lot of people's holly ferns died back in the recent freeze. So it's not going to be perfect, but you want to find something that's mostly evergreen or reliably evergreen. Roses are not a bad choice in full sun. We've got back here, these are southern wax myrtles, and cherry laurels are two classic, Central Texas choices for foundation plants. So that way in the winter, in this landscape, when the Pride of Barbados is cut back here, the other perennials, some of the annuals here are gone. There's still something in the beds year round, making the landscape look good and pulled together. This plant right here is my obsession right now, and it's my new favorite plant. This is called viburnum leaf mist flower. So it's not a viburnum, it's a mist flower, but it has a leaf that looks like a viburnum, and it is reliably evergreen. The ones in this yard and the ones in my yard survived the winter, which I was really surprised by. And they bloom very late. These are blooming they bloom in November and December. So that's good for bee forage. So on warm days in the winter time. So I love this plant, and it's my new favorite foundation plant. You can see it growing, and it's growing under some really big live oak trees. This is morning sun shining on them. They like shade, not deep, deep shade, but some morning sun and dappled shade. All right. So that's the concept with the foundation plants. Now I know I just blew through like two huge concepts. So Lois, are there any questions in the chat for me?
Yes, there are, Colleen. The first one is, what is the recommendation for how far from the house in feet that you should plant a large or a small tree?
That is really, there's a lot of factors that go into that, and it depends on who you ask. For me, if you have a slab foundation in Central Texas, I think planting a small tree near the house is okay. So for example, here we've got, these are viburnums here. I can't remember what they're called, this type of viburnum that looks kind of like a magnolia. These are fine. Their roots, I'm not a foundation expert, so I always say that first. But as an arborist, I know that tree roots are opportunistic. They find water. So if you have water under your house for some reason, they will find the water under there. If you don't have any water under your house, then you should be in good shape. I wish we had X-ray vision, but I wouldn't allow a really large shade tree, so like an oak or a pecan or a hackberry or something like that, to grow up close to the house. I'd want it to be at least 10, 15 feet away from any house. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Next question.
Yes. It says, do these plants that you're giving, that you're referring to, are any of them good for alkaline soil?
These are all good for alkaline soil.
Mhm.
Yes, yes. And that's largely what I deal in. I hardly ever have the opportunity to design for acidic soils. So all of these plants are going to be well adapted here in Central Texas, as almost everyone has alkaline soils. There's some exceptions, but in like Bastrop County, for example, but pretty much that's what we've got.
Okay, those are the questions so far.
Great. Okay. Awesome. Thank you for the questions, y'all. So I'm going to circle back and to our list of objectives for our landscape design. Okay, this is what we're hoping to achieve through the landscape design. And this is the example that I gave in the last class. And when I sit down to work on the design, I'll read over this all again to make sure I have these in mind when I sit down to work on the design. Okay, so I'm thinking about these goals. All right, and so for example, I'll just point out a few that they want an evergreen hedge to block some views. They're looking for minimal maintenance, native plants, perennial plants, plants that are drought tolerant. They need some help with the gutters and stuff like that. So I'm gonna show you how it comes together. So here's my base map that the surveyor made for me, or I took a title survey and cleaned it up, or maybe I'm using a Google satellite image. But in this case, this is the surveyor made this base map for me, and I took out the unnecessary information. So you can see where I like omitted stuff right here. Like there's those lines are missing because there's like another tree circle that I took out. I took out stuff that I didn't need. So the first thing that I'll do when I sit down, here are my little steps that I go through. The first thing that I do is I'll designate destinations in the landscape. So starting out, you'll see there's a door here, sliding door, and then their back door here, and this patio area. And they're going to need, and there's a gate here. So the homeowners are going to need ways to get from gates and doors to destinations like sheds. Okay. So the first thing I want to do is start thinking about where the walkways are going to go and where the destinations are. One of the objectives for this particular design was to have a vegetable garden. And so I decided I wanted to site the vegetable garden in a location where it was going to get enough sun, and vegetables need a lot of light. So this area here, you can see on the compass, this is north pointing that way. So this is south down here. So this area right here ends up being a good spot for vegetables. They'll get a little bit of afternoon shade from this tree right here. You can see this says CRZ. So these circles right here are tree critical root zones. That's what these big circles are. So you can see they've got two huge pecan trees right here. So these critical root zone circles here are really important, marked on this page. Okay, so that I'll know I don't want to put pavement through here. You know, I don't want to plant a bunch of really big plants in here because we don't want to mess up the roots when we're digging the holes. Okay. So there's going to be a vegetable garden here, which is another destination. Okay. They also asked for a fire bowl area and an area for a hammock. That's another destination. Okay. So that's over here in this drawing. When I started drawing it in pencil, I sketched out the vegetable garden here. So these are raised beds. Okay. And then I decided to site the firebowl and the hammock here, this is still in the critical root zone, but it's far enough away from the branches that it's not going to catch the tree on fire. You need at least 12 feet of clearance between tree branches and a fire bowl, but these weren't even close to the tree branches. And the hammock over here, it's still going to be shaded over here a little bit closer to the tree. So this space here, because it's in the critical root zone, we can't really do a ton of planting or anything. And to get from the patio to the vegetable garden and the patio to our seating areas, we're going to need a walkway. Now, because of the CRZs, the critical root zones of the big trees, I'm making this walkway out of cedar mulch. Okay, so this walkway is not going to be stone or anything. That needs to be set into the soil to where we're going to be digging here. Okay, so this is where we're just doing cedar mulch, which is a nice solution for making open spaces, seating areas, and walkways in critical root zones. Now over here, I made a walkway to connect the gate and the patio to the shed. And they wanted a modern look, so I made it very square, like very geometric. Usually I do more curves, but this was what the customers wanted. And in this case over here, because we're outside of most of the critical root zone, we're going to do step stones here with gravel. And those will be set into road base. So all this will get dug up. Okay. And right here, this is a solution for their drainage problem. They have a downspout right here. The water backs up in this area. So what I wanted them to do is I left this little gap right here that's just going to be gravel. And they're going to dig down there to make a shallow trench, fill it with the same kind of gravel that they're using in between these step stones, and that will help channel the water and let it percolate in without it being muddy here or anything washing away. Okay, so you got to think about your destinations. That's the number one thing. What destinations do we need? Where do they need to go? There's limiting factors for the destinations. Okay, when you have a fire bowl, you want it to be in a place that's safe and comfortable to sit. And when you have a vegetable garden, it needs to get enough light. So this is really the only place for it. And then you need to site your walkways, dry creek beds for drainage. That's step 2. Then, so you make the walkways where they're going to connect stuff. They're going to connect your destinations. You put in any dry creek beds that you need to manage water. And then I also, in step 2, put in the larger plants to meet objectives. And so in this case, you can see how many circles I made here. Like, these are mistakes in pencil of how I was trying to situate trees back here. So you can see I have sumac trees and loquat trees to try to help block the view, to give them some privacy because there's an ugly parking garage behind them. So I worked on this hedge for a long time, trying to figure out how to place these trees without planting in 1/4 of this critical root zone here. And you'll see in the final drawing, like how I worked it out. This took a lot of thought and work and trying to figure out how many trees we could fit here to make this work. So that's in step 2, as well as like placing bigger plants like a hedge like that. And they also wanted some fruit trees over here. So I'm putting a line of pears, and they have a little side yard here. So the big trees come next. And then I also cited here and here think, I don't know if that made it into the last drawing, a couple of more understory trees for a little added height and interest that they'd be able to see out of, to enjoy from the patio area and see out of this window here. So, and kind of block the view of the shed a little bit. Okay, so that's the second step. And when you're thinking about, creating the walkways, just make sure that you're leaving open space in the critical root zone, in the 1/4 critical root zone at least. Half critical root zone is the best. And like I said, through here, that's why this is going to be cedar mulch. But over here, we can do a more substantial walkway. Then the third step is placing the foundation plants. And so what I do is I'll just come in and I'll say like, okay, now the walkways and the destinations sort of dictated the space, the shape and size of the planting areas then. Okay, so I know I need a walkway here. I know I need walkways here. So that leaves this for planting, that leaves this for planting. And then I come in and I think about, I want to have foundation plants and I put them in the middle, generally. This is just my style. This is just something I've developed over the years. I don't know why I do it this way, but you can see here where I used a little bit bigger circle to show that those are going to be bigger foundation plants. And back here too, I have some foundation plants here and here and here, and I've circled them for my own reference while I'm working on it, that those are going to be the foundation plants. Okay. But most designers would tell you like pick a foundation plant and then repeat it throughout the yard, and you want to do it in odd numbers. Those are kind of like the quote unquote rules. And then all the rest of these, step 4, all the rest of these circles here all represent perennials, other perennial plants that, come and go throughout the seasons. Okay. So those are my kind of 4 steps that I go through when I sit down to start designing. And this usually takes me a day of work, maybe a little longer sometimes. Like the vegetable garden takes a long time to design a vegetable garden because you have to have all the dimensions right to be able to access the beds on all sides and reach in. So that adds a little time, but usually this takes me half a day for a backyard, half a day for a front yard, or something like that. Okay, here's the next question. How do I choose the plants? Well, I'm sorry, my brain is a plant encyclopedia. And oh yeah, check out what thrives in your neighborhood. And when I design, I often have plants at the front of my mind because I'll just think like, oh yeah, that looks really good right now in my yard. Or I was in a yard yesterday and the Mexican honeysuckles just looked great. I'll have something just at the front of my mind for some reason, and it just comes up that way. I've been gardening my whole life, and I've been professionally gardening for 20 years, and I just have the plant encyclopedia. But there's plenty of amazing books out there, especially I'm going to show you this one so you can go back to me for a second. This is the Travis County book. This is like Contraband in Williamson County. But this is the original version too. This is the best book of landscape plants, of native and adapted landscape plants, the Earthwise Guide for Central Texas from Travis County Extension in the city of Austin. It's also known as the Grow Green Guide. And a lot of the nurseries in Travis County, provide this for free. So you can pick these up, and this is a really good place to start when you're thinking about what to plant. But talk to your master gardener friends to get ideas. Okay. Okay, I'm going to go back to sharing. And then I want to show you how it starts coming together. I spend a lot of time on the art because I enjoy it. I do it all by hand because I find it more inspiring. And while I'm drawing, I'll get better ideas fall into place for me sometimes that I wouldn't have thought of if I was doing it on the computer. So here we go. We've got my little labels coming in pencil. It looks like a total mess here. Start inking over it and then designating which plants. And I always go back to the objectives, always go back to the goals. So these customers wanted native, low maintenance plants, well-adapted plants that will provide year-round interest. I love asters because they bloom twice. I usually include asters in my designs for that reason. So you just get really good amount of longevity out of them, and they attract beneficial insects and all that. So here it is inked in and then with most of the pencil erased. Okay, and I'm starting to put in the colored pencil, and I come in with the colored pencil, and then here it is finished. And this is the big reveal. So you can see here how I agonized over the trees and ended up changing my mind, and I wanted to put in a bay laurel for them, 2 loquats, and a flame leaf sumac. They ended up changing this, by the way, which I'll talk about more. You have to remember that the drawing is just a jumping off point. And I don't get too obsessed with what the particular plants should be. I obsess over what size plant and how many in a spot, and the characteristics of that plant, whether or not it's evergreen, and the texture of the foliage. Those are the things that I kind of focus on. So I've got kind of a mix of textures in this bed here. The Mexican honeysuckles function as the foundation plants in this bed, plus some dwarf Barbados cherries that also make a nice foundation plant. This is full shade here. And then the asters, and this will bloom in purple. I've got kind of a purple thing going on. Grassy textures. I wanted some, these customers were really big gardeners and moved here from the Midwest and were avid gardeners in the Midwest. So they had certain plants that they were interested in having. So I tried to include a lot of those plants that they requested too. So that's kind of how this comes together. There's a lot of factors. But you can see here how I got the cedar mulch walkways, some step stones through in some problem spots. Like I know this spot's going to be kind of muddy here. There's a lot of water that comes off the roof. So put some step stones in, some step stones through here because this is a planting area to kind of make it clear that you can walk through here. And this is how it came together. We've got the hedge blocking the view of the ugly parking garage behind them. Our walkways are connecting our destinations while also respecting the critical root zones of the trees. We've got the foundation plants and then the perennials that meet the objectives of attracting wildlife, being edible or useful, or they were on the list of plants that the homeowners asked for too. So this one was real fun to design. It's fun to design for people who are avid gardeners. Okay, I'm going to pause right here and answer some questions.
Okay, Colleen, first question, could you have used crushed granite as well for where you use cedar mulch?
That's a great question. And it's, for me, I would say no, because I prefer the mulch because it's going to decompose and provide food for the trees. It's going to decompose and provide a service for the trees. With the decomposed granite, you have to keep it clean. You have to keep the leaves off of it, otherwise the leaves, tree leaves, when they fall, will just decompose on it and, basically defeat the purpose, because then it'll be muddy. And so then you don't get the nutrient cycling for the trees that the trees benefit from. So, and the city of Austin is pretty strict about the use of decomposed granite around trees too. I know that doesn't apply to y'all in most of Williamson County, but the decomposed granite doesn't really do much for the trees and can get hot and cause problems for the trees. It also can be really high maintenance. And I'm going to talk about maintenance, but that's my background. That when I first started my business, I was a personal gardener providing maintenance to customers who had unconventional, unusual yards, and the decomposed granite was a lot of work. These homeowners wanted not just the cedar mulch, but a little something green in here, and they already have horse herb growing in this area. So you might remember from the last class that I said to like take stock of what you already have growing. And the horse herb is a pretty nice little ground cover.
It is.
So I told them, like, you can just, when you go to mulch this, just leave a couple of the horse herb plants, and then they'll grow over the cedar mulch. And then if you start to get too much horse herb, not enough mulch, just come in and mulch it again. So anyway, that's probably more of an answer than you wanted, but that's, yeah. So I try to avoid huge areas of decomposed granite in general, and especially under trees. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Maintenance is very important. I'm glad you're going to talk about that.
I am. Yeah.
And the next question was, how do you get from the veggie garden to the shed?
Oh, that's a great question, and probably a blind spot in my design. Thank you for pointing that out. I wonder if the homeowners are asking themselves that question right now. Well, in real life, what ended up happening is they ended up not wanting to put the firewood here. They have a firewood storage thing over here that they're going to keep. And so I think they're going to end up going this way. So from the gate here over here, and they also dramatically in real life reduced the size of the vegetable garden area. So, and I think they're only going to they might be putting the gate on this side, but yeah, so that's definitely an issue. But when the rubber meets the road, I think it's going to get fixed. In real life, they're probably going to go through here. So yeah, thank you for that question.
Well, great. And that's the end of our questions. And so back to you.
Okay, so I just blew through that, that's a lot of information in a short time. But wanted you all to, get a feel for how it comes together and to not stress out too much about it. I'm proud of my art, and I'm proud of the deliverables that I have for my customers, but I also have to keep in mind my little mantra is always start with a plan, and plans are meaningless. And I heard that from one of the head managers of the Mars rover project. That was their slogan. Always start with a plan, and plans are meaningless. So I always tell my customers, like, the plan is a jumping off point for you. It's never going to come out in real life the same way as it is on the paper. Okay, it's not going to be exact. There's too many mitigating factors. I mean, I'm going to go back to the plan here. Just like I was saying, like, of course, they're going to want a way to get from the vegetable garden to the shed. And I didn't even think of that until right now, and so that's going to change. And the vegetable garden area changed for them. And they just said, they thought like, that garden is huge. We don't need a garden that big, and it's okay. And I just tell them, like, you want it to be in this vicinity, in this area. Um, you want to have the seating in this vicinity. Don't mess with the trees here. Protect the CRZs, it's the jumping off point. It's these basic facts that are the most important part. And there's no way that they'll be able to find each one of these exact plants at the nursery too when they go to install it. So there needs to be some flexibility. If they can't find Henry Dulberg sage, you have to be open to, okay, we couldn't find Henry Dulberg sage, we can use Mexican bush sage instead. It's really similar. And when I make my designs, I include a materials list. And in the materials list, I include substitutes because you just sometimes nobody has a Henry Dulberg sages, So now we're getting into the second work of art where I was saying that landscape design requires 3 works of art and 4 dimensions. And this is the second work of art, which is the landscape being translated from the paper to the ground. And the way I wanted to show you how this is done is from a movie, a documentary called 5 Seasons, that is about a famous plantsman turned landscape designer named Pete Udolph, and he's from the Netherlands. And I'm gonna share a movie clip with you right now from that movie. And if you get the chance to see that movie, it is really cool. Hold on one sec. Let me just find how to share with you guys. There's Lois. Hi, y'all. Okay, here we go. And I'm going to hit play. Lois, chime in if there's any problem. You actually don't need the sound for it. So don't be alarmed, like if you can't hear it, because there's subtitles. But this shows the process that they're going through. The installation company, the landscape installation company, translating his design from paper to the ground. He's really famous. He's done the High Line in New York. My favorite garden of all time, the Lurie Garden in Chicago. He's really well known. So they did this cool movie about him, and he's a nursery plant guy. He's not a landscape architect, which I love. So here we go.
There haven't been any so far.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Pete Udolph is the name of the plantsman. 5 Seasons is the movie. It's a really fun movie to watch. He visits Texas in the movie, and it's awesome. Watching him talk about Texas plants is really neat. So here's the third work of art now. The third work of art and the fourth dimension. Here's my Monarda fistulosa at my house. This plant is wonderful. Everyone should have it. The third work of art is maintenance. So now we're going to talk about maintenance with our last 10 minutes. The fourth dimension is time. So that's watching the plants grow and evolve and change in the landscape. My Monarda fistulosa fell over in a way I didn't expect it to. So it was much wider than I anticipated. There's my little pollinator house. Okay, so there's 3 takeaways from this part of the talk about maintenance. And I've done the my full maintenance talk for you all in the past, and I'd love to come and do it again sometime. But the 3 takeaways from this part of the class is that fall is the best time for editing your garden, because that's when all the plants are at their largest size. And that's when it becomes really clear when something is really too big, or there really is an empty space in the garden at that time, or things are starting to get overgrown. You'll be able to tell in the fall. And transplanting, dividing, and filling in gaps in the garden is just as important as pruning. That's what I mean by editing. Kind of taking out plants that are failing, that aren't thriving, transplanting stuff that got too crowded, dividing stuff, filling in holes. And then finally, just the realization that plants don't read books. You'll read in the book, it'll say Monarda fistulosa is 4 feet tall and wide. This is much more than 4 feet wide. It didn't read the book. You know, they're not going to behave the way that you expect them to all the time. They're always changing and moving. Things are going to happen that you don't expect. And some of those accidents are happy accidents. But just keep that in mind. They don't know how big they're supposed to get. Okay, so I'm going to give you some examples, and y'all may have seen these slides before from my other presentation, but this will be a little review. So this is a garden that I used to maintain. This is the Miller neighborhood native plant demonstration garden, which is worth visiting. I haven't been maintaining it it's been about 3 years now since I stopped maintaining it, but it's located at 2500 Tom Miller Street. So I don't know what condition it's in now, but this is a few months after I started working there. I took this photo and I realized that there's a palm tree in there. And I'd been working there like 2 or 3 months before I noticed that there's a palm tree in this picture. And what happened is behind it, there's a rough leaf dogwood hedge, which is really nice, provides the service of blocking a view of the street from this walkway right here. But they're notorious for runners, for like coming up from the roots, or having roots that run like right along the ground like this and then coming up. So all of this right here is dogwood sprouts that have grown up. And so I realized, like, we got to get in there and dig up those dogwood sprouts so that you can actually see the palm tree. And the palm tree is functioning in this case as a foundation plant. So here you can see where we thinned the hedge a lot to let it kind of rejuvenate and grow back in. And so right here was where all the dogwood runners were growing up and engulfing this dwarf palm tree. And what I did instead to help inhibit the growth of the dwarf palms, inhibit the growth of the rough leaf dogwood hedge and their runners, is we planted aggressive perennials here that will keep this area shaded, will shade the ground here and help prevent the dogwoods from sprouting up. Anytime you leave open space in a landscape, stuff's going to grow in it. So for me, when I do my landscape designs, I always pack in as many plants as I can. So here's fall asters and Salvia coccinea, also known as tropical sage, aggressive perennials that grow fast, grow real big, and cover the ground. So there's no open spaces here where those little runners will be able to grow up and get light. Okay. Here's another example. Here's a plant called coralberry that also has runners. This is a shrub, and you can see how it's running. They have branches that arch out and then root themselves in the ground. And then they also have runners along the top of the ground that are like weird stems that kind of lay on top of the ground to help the plant spread. And here you can see it grows into the walkway all the time. And the previous company that was maintaining this, they were just shearing this plant over and over again to try to keep it out of the walkway. And it started to get really ugly. So instead of just pruning it, shearing it over and over again, it's a wise move to go ahead and get your shovel out and just dig out the roots and runners along the walkway so that there's space there. And then you don't have to trim it over and over and over again. And they start to just look like sticks because you're just ripping off all the leaves all the time. So leave like a 2-foot space kind of dug out. And we'd do this about once a year. We'd come through and dig that out and keep that clear that way. So that way you don't have to keep trimming it, because we'd have to trim it, every week or every 2 weeks because they grow so fast. Okay. When you're editing the landscape, if you have plants that are not thriving or plants that don't look good, ask the plant, why should I let you live? It's okay. So landscape changes over time, things start to not thrive. This plant, these 2 Texas sage plants here are getting shorn too much. They're being shorn every week. The lawn guys come with the power shears and they're just shearing them over and over again to try to control their shape and size because they're too big for the space. And so when they get over shorn, they get holes in them like this. Every plant does that. If you shear them too much, they start to get holes in them and they get dead branches. And they're ugly. Why would you leave that? So dig them up and move them over here where there's more room and let them grow and stop trimming them. Okay. So I know I sound incredulous. I'm sorry. I've been at it for too long. I don't mean to be condescending. It's just not, it's a different point of view that I have about maintenance. It's okay to put down the power tools and pick up a shovel and move things around, or just take them out. There's another grass in here that may have volunteered in with the shrub. You might leave that grass and take the shrubs out, get more grasses, something like that. So that's the kind of editing, the things that change over time where plants start to get too big or bigger than you thought, and they need to get moved around. So getting to the end now. So I want to show you my last slide so that you'll have my information. If you want more information about my services, I can come and do a consult with you and give you advice about your property. Any advice that you need, I'm a certified arborist. So if you need tree advice too, I can help you with that. Check out my website, atxgardens.com. I teach classes all over the place. I'm doing a class for Hill Country Bloomers coming up in the fall, and I'll be back with Williamson County Master Gardeners, I think, next year in the late spring or summer. I would just want to thank Judy Williams for inviting me to speak to y'all. I just love it. And check out my podcast, The Horticulturati. It's really fun. Me and my friend Leah just talking about whatever's on our minds and doing research on topics that are interesting to us, and hope they're interesting to you too. And check out Central Texas Seed Savers. Join us for our seed swap October 9th at the Central Library in downtown Austin. And I'll take a couple more questions. So if it's okay with you, Lois.
Okay, we have several more actually,
Okay.
Connie. The first one is someone wanted you to talk a little bit more about the critical root zone do's and don'ts.
Well, the critical root zone, basically, if you measure the diameter of the tree, what I didn't mention is you want to measure the diameter of the tree at 4-foot height. Okay. So the diameter of the tree trunk at 4-foot height, and then that diameter in inches is equal to the critical root zone in feet and the radius from the tree trunk out. Okay, so that's all the geometry from 10th grade that you didn't think you'd ever use. I'm using all the time now. All right, so don't do anything in 1/4 of the critical root zone. You can't make any changes. Don't make any changes. Don't do anything there. Don't plant anything. You can put a little bit of mulch. Don't let the mulch touch the tree trunks. Don't let the mulch touch the root flare. That's really important. If you pile anything up around a tree trunk or around the root flare, and the root flare is the part of the tree trunk comes down like this, and then you should be able to see the roots flare out. And if you pile anything up against it, it will kill the tree. So that's the most important thing. And then in half of the critical root zone, so you've got the 1/4, and then you've got the half, you can have 4 inches. So you could plant 1-gallon plants would be the biggest plant that you could plant. You can put 4 inches of mulch on top of it. You don't want to dig down more than 4 inches or pile up more than 4 inches optimally. Okay. And then in the 50%, and then the rest of the critical root zone, the city of Austin asks that you preserve 50% of it. So if you're going to come through and put like a driveway in, you can only put a driveway through half of that outer part of the critical root zone. So it's very confusing. They don't want you to pave like all around the tree, So it's just about being mindful of how huge tree root systems are, how far out they spread from the trunk of the tree, and how shallow they are and how sensitive they are, and that we need to be mindful of them. Okay.
Okay, and the next question is about the success of cherry Barbados in the Edwards Plateau limestone area when you have a very thin layer of soil over the limestone. What has been your experience with them?
Well, I haven't had much experience with them in thin soil because usually there's an overlap with thin soil and deer pressure, and they are not deer resistant.
Correct.
So so I don't usually get an opportunity to plant them in those conditions. And anyway, if we have really thin soil in the Edwards Plateau area, I usually encourage people to bring in soil and plant into mounds, into berms, and raised beds to have a little bit more success. Ease of planting on you, if you're planting a shrub like a Barbados cherry, they're going to usually come in a 3-gallon pot, and you can't dig a hole.
Right.
I mean, it just makes it a miserable experience. So it's much better practice to bring in soil. And so I don't have a ton of experience with them on thin soils. Usually I'm planting them on the east side and the Blackland Prairie, or if you're lucky enough to be in one of the parts of Williamson County where you have sandy soil, deep sandy soil, which I have seen pockets. If you have post oaks and mesquite trees where you are, that's a sign that you have deep soil. And there are parts of Williamson County close to Burnett County that have sand, and it's amazing.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, well, the
What
next
else?
question is, any advice on how to prevent crossvine runners from shooting up plants all over your grass?
Well, no. No, I mean, that's just more maintenance, and all of the vines, you may have noticed in that design that I did, I included some grapevines only because it's an heavy edible. That landscape wasn't heavy on the edibles, but I don't include a lot of vines in my designs when people ask for low maintenance landscapes, because I find vines to be very high maintenance. So I tend to avoid vines. Yeah.
Okay, the next question, when you're planting a bed and you have to space plants to allow for the mature size of those plants,
Mhm.
then how do you prevent the weeds from growing?
Okay. So this is a very controversial question. I plant a lot of plants really close together that will get overgrown on purpose. If it's up to me, I'm always getting lots of plants, packing them really close together, because I would rather I'd rather prune, divide, and transplant than weed. Because if you leave the open spaces, you're going to get weeds. So I like to really pack the plants in. But, if you're in a situation where you don't have the budget for that many plants, or some people prefer weeding to other types of gardening, then that's okay. If you prefer weeding to trimming and transplanting and dividing, then go for it. Put them further apart. Some people don't like a crowded look in the landscape. That's a matter of taste, and would prefer to have plants further apart. Then you just have to do more weeding.
Okay. Okay, the next question is a recommendation of the best way to get rid of crabgrass.
Well, it depends on the situation and where you are and what you're trying to grow. So if you have crabgrass in a planting bed, I always recommend sheet mulching, covering the ground with, cutting the weeds down however you can with a weed eater or a mower or whatever, covering the ground with cardboard, leaving the cardboard on the ground, and then immediately covering it with a couple inches of compost and a couple inches of mulch. And that will help cut off their life cycle, cuts off the light to the leaves and helps smother the plants. But if you're talking about crabgrass in a lawn, then you should schedule a consultation with me to talk about grass.
Okay. Okay. And Colleen, in the chat box, there is a little place that you can click that says file, and you may be able to include a file from your computer into the chat box if you are going to give that document about calculating. Yes,
Great.
you can do that.
Okay.
Mhm.
About measuring the trees.
Yes, you mentioned that document, sharing that document. So if you click on that little box in the chat, this is file, maybe
Okay.
from your computer, it would allow you to attach that file.
Okay, this is actually a link.
Okay, attach the link.
So that's the link for you all to cut and paste that link.
Now be sure that you have it set on to everyone instead of just me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Everyone.
We had been messaging a while ago.
Okay, there we go. Okay, y'all, so you can have that for instructions on how to measure a tree.
Did you click onto everyone? Great, I see that.
Okay,
Resource for measuring trees. Yay.
Okay, great.
Wonderful. Okay.
Okay.
Well, Colleen, round of applause, and thank you so much for being here with us and sharing your information with us. We really appreciate it. And thank you, Judy, for inviting her to come. And we hope to see you again. And Master Gardeners, we look forward to actually seeing you in person in September. We're going to have a meeting in our first meeting in person in September. So we look forward to that. So thank you very much. Enjoyed it very much. This is awesome.
All
Good to
right.
see you guys and
Thank
have you
y'all.
with us. Okay.
Thank you
Bye.
so much.
Okay. Bye, everyone. See you
Bye.
soon. Join us next month.